David had always been different from other people. While his friends were out partying or watching movies, he spent his nights staring at computer screens filled with numbers, graphs, and strange patterns from space. He worked at a big telescope stationed in Puerto Rico, the kind of place where scientists listen to sounds from faraway stars and planets. Most people thought his job was boring. All day long, he would sit in a dark room with huge machines that picked up radio signals from deep space. These signals were usually just random noise, like static on an old radio, but David loved it. To him, every beep and buzz might be something amazing waiting to be discovered. David was 34 years old and had been doing this work for almost 10 years. He lived alone in a small apartment near the telescope station. He had no girlfriend, few friends, and his family thought he was wasting his life. But David didn't care what others thought. He believed that one day he would find something incredible. Out there in the darkness of space. His co-workers at the station often joked about him. They called him the Night Owl because he always volunteered for the late shifts. When everyone else wanted to go home, while they were sleeping, David would be awake, watching screens and listening to the universe's whispers. He drank too much coffee, ate too many sandwiches from the vending machine, and sometimes forgot to change his clothes for days. The telescope station was located on a hill surrounded by thick jungle. During the day, you could hear birds singing and monkeys chattering in the trees. But at night, when David worked, everything was quiet except for the humming of the big machines and the occasional sound of rain. On the metal roof. On Tuesday night, in March, something changed. David was doing his usual routine, checking different frequencies and recording any unusual patterns. The weather was hot and humid, making his shirt stick to his back. He had been working for 12 hours straight, and his eyes were getting tired from staring at the bright computer screens. Around 2 in the morning, David noticed something strange on his monitor. Instead of the usual random static, there was a pattern. It looked like a series of numbers that repeated every few minutes. At first, he thought it might be interference from a satellite or maybe a problem with his equipment. But as he studied the pattern more carefully, David realized this was different from anything he had ever seen. The numbers weren't random at all. They were organized in a way that seemed almost intelligent. It was like someone was trying to send a message using mathematics. David's heart started beating faster. This could be it. This could be the discovery he had been waiting for. His whole life, he quickly started recording everything and began running the signal through different computer programs to analyze it better. The pattern was coming from a direction in space that pointed toward the Andromeda Galaxy, millions of miles away from Earth. But that was impossible. No human technology could send signals that far, and the signal was stronger than anything natural that scientists had ever detected. As the hours passed, David became more and more excited. He forgot about being tired. He forgot about being hungry. All he could think about was this mysterious signal and what it might mean. He tried calling his supervisor, but it was the middle of the night, and no one answered. By morning, David had filled dozens of computer files with data about the signal. When his coworkers arrived, they found him still sitting at his desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pages of handwritten notes. His hair was messy. His clothes were wrinkled, and he had a wild look in his eyes. "David, did you sleep at all last night?" asked his colleague Robert. "Sleep? No. No time for sleep. Look at this." David pointed excitedly at his computer screen. "This signal is coming from Andromeda. It's not natural. Someone or something is sending this to us." Robert looked at the screen and frowned. "Are you sure it's not just equipment malfunction? Maybe the computers are making an error." But David had already checked everything twice. The equipment was working perfectly. The signal was real, and it was definitely coming from deep space. Over the next few days, David barely left the station. He worked day and night, trying to understand more about the mysterious transmission. The signal seemed to be getting stronger each day, as if whatever was sending it was getting closer or putting more power behind it. David also noticed that the mathematical patterns were becoming more complex. It was like watching someone learn to speak a new language, getting better and better at communicating. Strange things started happening around the station too. Sometimes, the lights would flicker for no reason. Electronic devices would turn on and off by themselves. And David began having the most vivid dreams he had ever experienced. In these dreams, he saw cities made of crystal floating in space, and creatures made of pure light moving between stars like birds flying through the sky. During the day, David would wake up feeling like these dreams were more real than his actual life. He could remember every detail perfectly, which was unusual because he normally never remembered his dreams. The dream cities were beautiful beyond anything on Earth, with towers that seemed to grow like trees and lights that danced like aurora in the sky. After 3 weeks of studying the signal, David made a breakthrough that changed everything. He realized that the mathematical patterns weren't just random numbers. They were coordinates, pointing to specific locations in space. And one of those coordinates was pointing directly at Earth. More specifically, they were pointing at the exact location of David's telescope station. Whatever was sending this signal knew exactly where David was, and it was trying to communicate with him personally. David stared at his computer screen for what felt like hours. The coordinates were clear as day. Whatever was sending this signal from millions of miles away knew exactly where he was sitting. His hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee cup, but it was already empty. He had been so focused on the discovery that he forgot to drink it. For the first time in weeks, David felt scared. What if this wasn't just a scientific discovery? What if something was actually coming to find him? He looked around the empty telescope station. It was past midnight again, and he was completely alone. The jungle outside seemed darker and quieter than usual. David had always dreamed of making contact with life from other planets, but now that it might actually be happening, he wasn't sure he was ready. He thought about calling the government or the military, but who would believe him? Even his own co-workers thought he was getting too obsessed with this signal. Taking a deep breath, David made a decision that would change his life forever. If something out there was trying to talk to him, maybe he should try to talk back. He had been studying the mathematical patterns for weeks and understood them well enough to create his own response. David spent the next 2 hours writing a simple mathematical message. He used the same number patterns he had been receiving, but arranged them to show basic information about Earth and humans. He included details about our planet's size, our solar system, and even some basic facts about human biology. When he was ready, David's finger hovered over the send button. Once he transmitted this message into space, there would be no going back. He would officially be making first contact with an alien intelligence. After a moment of hesitation, he pressed the button. The response came faster than David ever expected. Within minutes, his equipment started receiving a new signal. This time, it wasn't just mathematical patterns. The signal seemed to be doing something to his machines. The lights in the room began to flicker, and all the computer screens started glowing brighter. David jumped back from his desk as a strange humming sound filled the air. It was like the sound of electricity, but softer and more musical. The temperature in the room started to drop, and David could see his breath forming small clouds in the suddenly cold air. Then something impossible happened. A soft blue light began to appear in the center of the room. At first, it was just a tiny dot, like a star, but it grew bigger and brighter until it was the size of a person. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it was gentle and warm, like moonlight on water. David couldn't move. He stood frozen behind his desk, watching as the light began to take shape. Slowly, the outline of a person appeared inside the glow. It was tall and graceful, with features that seemed perfect in every way. As the light faded, David found himself looking at the most beautiful being he had ever seen. She was clearly not human, but she wasn't scary or strange looking. Her skin seemed to glow with its own soft light, and her eyes were like looking into deep space filled with stars. She wore clothes that looked like they were made of liquid silver that moved and flowed around her body like water. "Hello, David," she said, and her voice was like hearing music for the first time. She spoke English perfectly, but there was something about the way she said his name that made it sound like the most important word in the universe. David tried to speak, but no words came out. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to ordinary people like him. Do not be afraid, she continued, taking a small step toward him. I have traveled very far to find you. My name is Zara, and I am the queen of many worlds beyond your solar system. A queen? David's mind was racing. He was talking to actual royalty from outer space. He managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why? Why me? Zara smiled. And when she did, the whole room seemed to become brighter. Because you are special, David. More special than you know. My people have been searching for someone like you for many generations. You have something we desperately need. She explained that she ruled over 17 different star systems, commanding fleets of ships that could travel between galaxies in the blink of an eye. Her people were ancient and wise, with technology that could do things humans couldn't even imagine. They could move planets, create new stars, and even travel through time. But despite all their advanced knowledge and power, they were facing a threat they couldn't handle alone. Dark creatures from the empty spaces between galaxies were spreading across the universe, destroying everything in their path. These creatures fed on light and life, leaving nothing but cold darkness behind them. We call them the Shadow Devourers, Zara explained. They have already consumed dozens of civilizations. Our weapons cannot hurt them, and our shields cannot stop them. But our ancient prophecies speak of a bridge builder, someone who can connect different types of minds and find solutions we cannot see. David listened in amazement as Zara told him about her world. Her people could live for thousands of years and had minds that worked like supercomputers. They could share thoughts instantly across vast distances and see possible futures before they happened, but they all thought in the same logical way, following patterns and rules that had worked for millions of years. Humans think differently. Zara said, you can make leaps of imagination that we cannot. You can find answers in chaos where we see only confusion. That is why we need you, David. That is why I need you. The way she said I need you made David's heart skip a beat. There was something in her voice, something beyond just the mission she was describing. When their eyes met, David felt a connection he had never experienced before. It was like she could see directly into his soul. But there is more, Zara continued, her voice becoming softer. The prophecies don't just speak of a bridge builder. They speak of my destined companion, the one being in all the universe whose spirit matches mine perfectly. She looked directly at David, and her glowing eyes seemed to see right through him. I have searched for you across time and space, through countless worlds and dimensions. I have waited centuries for this moment. Then Zara said words that made David's world stop spinning. You are mine, David. You have always been mine, even before you were born. And now I have found you. David stood completely frozen. His mind couldn't process what he was hearing. A queen from outer space, the most powerful being he could imagine, was claiming that he belonged to her, that they were destined to be together. But accepting her call would mean leaving everything behind. His job, his planet, his entire life as a human being. Could he really abandon Earth to join her on an adventure across the stars? And what would happen to him if he said yes as David stared into Zara's star-like eyes? He realized that his quiet life of listening to space signals was over forever. Now he had to make the biggest decision any human had ever faced. David couldn't sleep for 3 days after meeting Zara. She had given him time to think about her offer, but how could anyone make such a huge decision? Leave Earth forever to help save the universe. It sounded like something from a science fiction movie. Not real life, but Zara was definitely real. She had left behind a small crystal that glowed softly on his desk. Proof that their meeting actually happened. Sometimes David would stare at it for hours, wondering if he was going crazy. The crystal felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. On the 4th night, David made his choice. He couldn't stop thinking about what Zara had told him, about the Shadow Devourers destroying entire worlds. How could he live with himself knowing he might be able to help stop such terrible destruction? And if he was being honest, he couldn't stop thinking about Zara herself. No one had ever made him feel so important, so needed dot when Zara appeared. Again in the same blue light, David was ready with his answer. "I'll come with you," he said. Trying to sound braver than he felt, Zara's smile lit up the entire room. "I knew you would make the right choice. You have a good heart, David. That is one of the reasons why you are so special." The journey to Zara's world was unlike anything David could have imagined. Her ship didn't look like the rockets humans built. Instead, it was more like a living creature made of the same silver material as her clothes. When they stepped inside, David felt like he was walking into the belly of a whale, but one that was made of stars and light. "How does it fly?" David asked, looking around at the curved walls that seemed to breathe. "It doesn't fly," Zara explained with amusement. "It thinks its way through space. My people learned long ago that the universe is more like a mind than a machine. If you know how to ask nicely, space will fold itself to take you where you want to go." As they traveled, David watched through transparent walls as stars and planets rushed past them like cars on a highway, but they weren't moving fast in the normal sense. Instead, the space around them was bending and twisting, bringing their destination closer to them. "This is impossible," David whispered, pressing his face against the wall. "Only because your people haven't learned how yet." Zara said gently, "Give Earth a few thousand years, and you'll be traveling this way too." The first thing David saw when they arrived at Zara's home world was a city floating in the clouds. Not just one building, but an entire city made of crystal towers that twisted up into the sky like frozen lightning. The buildings seemed to grow rather than being built, and they glowed with their own inner light that changed colors like a slow rainbow. "Welcome to Luminara," Zara said proudly. "This is the capital world of the celestial domain." As their ship descended toward the floating city, David saw more wonders than his mind could process. Gardens hung in midair with no ground beneath them, filled with plants that looked like they were made of pure light. Waterfalls flowed upward instead of down, forming spirals and loops in the sky before disappearing into clouds of sparkling mist. The people of Luminara were as beautiful as their queen, but each one looked slightly different. Some had skin that changed color like Zara's clothes, others had hair that moved like it was underwater, and a few seemed to be made partly of light itself. Despite their strange appearance, they all welcomed David with warm smiles and curious looks. "They've never seen a human before," Zara explained as they walked through streets that felt like walking on soft sand. "But they have been waiting for you for a very long time. Our oldest prophecies speak of the bridge builder who would come from a distant world to help us in our darkest hour." David felt overwhelmed by the attention. Everywhere they went, people stopped what they were doing to look at him. Children with eyes like tiny galaxies peeked out from behind their parents, giggling and whispering. Adults bowed respectfully, and some even reached out to gently touch his arm, as if they couldn't believe he was real. "I'm nobody special," David told Zara as they walked toward her palace, which looked like a mountain made of diamonds. "I'm just a guy who listens to radio signals. Why do they think I'm so important?" Zara stopped walking and turned to face him. Her expression was serious but kind. "David, your people have something that we lost long ago. You call it intuition, creativity, the ability to think outside the rules. We have become so advanced that we forgot how to imagine new solutions." She led him to a balcony that overlooked the entire city. From up there, David could see that Luminara was just one of many floating cities. In the distance, dozens of other crystal cities drifted through the clouds like boats on a calm sea. "We can predict the future with our technology," Zara continued. "We can calculate the movement of every star and planet. We can even control the weather on our worlds. But when the Shadow Devourers appeared, all our predictions failed. They don't follow any rules we understand." David watched as ships that looked like schools of glowing fish swam through the air. Between the cities, everything here was so advanced, so perfect, it was hard to believe that these people needed help from someone like him. "Our minds work like your computers," Zara explained, "very fast, very accurate, but only able to process information in logical patterns. Your human brain can make connections that don't follow logic. You can see answers where we see only chaos. Over the next few days, Zara showed David the true size of her empire. Using viewing devices that could see across vast distances, David watched as entire fleets of starships moved between planets like migrating birds. He saw worlds where people lived inside the rings of giant planets, space stations that collected energy from exploding stars, and even planets that had been completely rebuilt into perfect gardens. But he also saw the damage caused by the Shadow Devourers, entire solar systems that had been stripped of all light and life, leaving behind only cold. Dead rocks floating in darkness. The sight made David's stomach turn. Whatever these creatures were, they had to be stopped. How many people have they? David couldn't finish the question. Billions, Zara said quietly. Maybe trillions. They move faster than we can evacuate worlds, and our weapons pass right through them like they're made of smoke. As David learned more about the threat facing the universe, he also began to understand why Zara had chosen him specifically. During their time together, he noticed that she seemed different when they were alone. Round her people, she was confident and regal, every inch a queen. But when it was just the two of them, she would sometimes look tired or worried. It's lonely being responsible for so many lives, she admitted one evening as they stood on a balcony watching the sunset. The sky on Luminara turned purple and gold, with 3 moons rising like silver coins. Don't you have advisors or friends to help you? David asked. Zara shook her head. My people look to me for strength and answers. I cannot show them my fears or doubts. They would lose hope. She looked at David with those star-filled eyes. But with you, I can be myself. You see me not as a queen, but as a person. David felt his heart skip a beat. Despite everything that had happened, despite being on an alien world surrounded by incredible technology, the most amazing thing of all was getting to know Zara as more than just a powerful ruler. She was kind, funny, and surprisingly curious about human customs and Earth culture. But their peaceful moments were interrupted by urgent news. The Shadow Devourers had been spotted moving toward the outer planets of Zara's domain. The invasion that everyone had been dreading was about to begin, and David knew that his real test was just starting. The training began immediately after the Shadow Devourers were spotted. David had to learn how to connect his human mind with celestial technology, and it was harder than anything he had ever done in his life. The process required him to sit inside a chamber that looked like a giant crystal egg, while machines scanned his brain and tried to understand how human thoughts worked. It feels like someone is tickling the inside of my head, David told Zara. After his first session, he was exhausted and had a headache that felt like someone was playing drums behind his eyes. Zara looked worried. The connection is difficult because our minds work so differently, but you're making progress faster than we hoped. Most of my people trained for years to interface with our technology. The bridge building process was strange and wonderful at the same time. When David successfully connected with the celestial machines, he could suddenly understand things that had seemed impossible before. He could feel the flow of energy through the entire city, sense the movements of ships in space, and even touch the minds of Zara's people. But the most amazing part was when Zara joined him in the connection, when their minds linked together. Through the technology, David experienced something beyond anything he had ever imagined. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, and the incredible love she had for her people and all the worlds under her protection. This is what we call soul bonding, Zara explained after their first successful connection. It's something my people do with their closest companions. But I've never experienced anything like what happens when our minds touch. David felt the same way. When they were connected, he could sense Zara's wisdom and strength, but also her fears and the heavy burden she carried as a leader. At the same time, she could experience his human creativity and the way his mind could jump between ideas. Without following strict logical paths, you think in colors and music. Zara said with wonder, when you solve problems, your mind creates patterns that look like beautiful paintings. It's no wonder your species can find solutions we miss. As the days passed, their connection grew stronger both through the technology and in their personal relationship. David found himself falling in love with Zara in a way that went beyond physical attraction. They shared thoughts, dreams, and feelings that he had never been able to share with anyone else. But their happiness was overshadowed by the approaching danger. Reports came in daily about the Shadow Devourers' advance through Zara's outer territories. Entire star systems were going dark as the creatures consumed everything in their path. Refugee ships arrived hourly, filled with survivors who had escaped. Just in time, David met some of these refugees and was heartbroken by their stories. Families who had been separated when their worlds were attacked. Children who had never seen their home planets again, and warriors who had tried to fight them. Shadow Devourers only to watch their weapons pass harmlessly through the dark creatures. They're not like any enemy we've ever faced, explained Commander Thane, one of Zara's top military leaders. Our energy weapons go right through them. Our shields might as well be made of paper, and they seem to get stronger every time they consume another world. Working with Zara and her scientists, David began to understand why the Shadow Devourers were so dangerous. They existed partially outside normal space and time, which made them nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons. But David's human intuition helped him see patterns in their behavior that the logical celestial minds had missed. "Look at this," David said one day, pointing to a map showing the Shadow Devourers' movements. "They're not attacking randomly. They're moving in a spiral pattern, always toward areas with the most life energy. And they always attack at the same time of day on each planet." Zara studied the map with amazement. "You're right. How did we miss something so obvious?" "Because you were looking for complex patterns," David explained. "Sometimes the answer is simple, but you have to step back to see it." Using this insight, David and Zara developed a plan that might actually work against the Shadow Devourers. Instead of trying to fight them directly, they would create a trap. David's analysis showed that the creatures were drawn to large concentrations of life energy like moths to a flame. If they could create a fake energy source that the Shadow Devourers couldn't resist, they might be able to lure them into a special prison made from folded space. But the plan required something that terrified everyone involved. Someone would have to go into the heart of the Shadow Devourers' territory and plant a device that could only be activated by human brain patterns. It was essentially a suicide mission, because no one had ever entered Shadow Devourer space and returned alive. "I'll do it," David said when they finished explaining the plan to Zara's war council. "I'm the only human here, so I'm the only one who can activate the device." The room fell silent. Zara's face went pale, and David could see tears forming in her star-like eyes. "No," she said firmly, "there has to be another way. You know there isn't." David replied gently, "This is why I'm here, isn't it? This is what I was meant to do." That night, David and Zara stood together on the balcony of her palace, watching the stars. But instead of the peaceful twinkling David remembered from Earth, many of the stars were going dark as the Shadow Devourers consumed the worlds around them. "I just found you," Zara whispered, leaning against David's shoulder. "I can't lose you now." David wrapped his arms around her, feeling the warmth of her glowing skin and the gentle pulse of energy that flowed through her body. "You won't lose me," he promised, "even if something happens to my physical body. Our connection goes deeper than that. You showed me that through the soul bonding." They talked through the night about their feelings for each other and the future they had hoped to build together. Zara told David about planets in her domain where they could have lived together in peace, building a family and exploring the wonders of the universe. David shared his dreams of showing Zara around Earth, introducing her to human culture, and maybe even finding a way to help both their peoples learn from each other if we succeed. Zara said as the first light of dawn began to glow on the horizon, "I want you to know that you've given me something I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to love someone more than duty, more than responsibility, more than life itself." David kissed her forehead gently. "And you've shown me that I was never just ordinary. You made me believe I could be a hero." The final preparations began the next morning. David would pilot a small, fast ship designed to slip through the Shadow Devourer's defenses. Meanwhile, Zara would command the combined fleets of all 17 civilizations in her domain. creating a distraction to draw the creature's attention away from David's mission. As David prepared to leave, Zara gave him a pendant made from the same crystal material as her palace. "This contains a piece of my soul," she explained. "No matter how far apart we are, you'll always be able to feel my love for you." David put the pendant around his neck and felt its warmth spread through his chest. "And you'll always have my heart," he replied, standing at the dock where his ship waited. David looked back at the floating crystal cities of Luminara one last time. In just a few weeks, this beautiful world had become more of a home to him than Earth had ever been. But now he was about to leave it behind, possibly forever, to save not just these people, but countless other civilizations across the universe. As he climbed into his ship, David could see Zara watching from her palace balcony, even at that distance. Her glow was visible, like a star that refused to be dimmed by the approaching darkness. He knew that whatever happened next, their love had already changed both of them forever. David's ship cut through space like a silver arrow, heading straight toward the darkest region of the galaxy. Behind him, he could see the lights of Zara's massive fleet spreading out like a glowing. Then across the stars, 17 different civilizations had sent their best ships and warriors to create the biggest distraction in galactic history. The plan was simple but dangerous. While Zara's forces attacked the Shadow Devourers from one side, David would sneak around to their home base and plant the quantum device that could trap them forever. But as David got closer to his destination, he began to understand just how terrifying these creatures really were. The space around the Shadow Devourers' territory looked wrong. Stars flickered and went out like candles being blown out by an invisible wind. Planets that should have been there simply weren't, leaving empty gaps in space where entire worlds used to exist. Even the darkness itself seemed hungry, reaching out toward David's ship like grasping fingers. "Stay focused," David whispered to himself, clutching Zara's crystal pendant. He could still feel her presence through their connection, warm and reassuring. Even across the vast distance between them, "You can do this. You have to do this." As David entered the twisted realm where the Shadow Devourers lived, his ship's instruments started going crazy. The normal rules of physics didn't seem to work here. Up and down became meaningless concepts. Time moved in strange ways, sometimes fast and sometimes so slow that David felt like he was swimming through thick honey. The landscape around him was like something from a nightmare. Broken pieces of destroyed worlds floated in impossible arrangements, held together by streams of dark energy that pulsed like blood through veins. David saw the remains of cities that had been torn apart and rebuilt into twisted sculptures. That hurt to look at, but the most disturbing sight was the Shadow Devourers themselves. They moved through their realm like living storms, constantly, shifting between different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they looked almost human, other times like giant spiders made of darkness, and occasionally like nothing David's mind could understand at all. David had to pilot his ship carefully through this maze of destruction, avoiding the attention of the creatures while searching for their central core. According to Zara's information, the Shadow Devourers had built some kind of fortress at the heart of their territory, where they stored all the energy they had stolen from consumed worlds. Finding the fortress was easier than David expected, but not in a good way. It was visible from millions of miles away, a massive structure that seemed to be built from crystallized pain and suffering. It pulsed with sickly light that made David feel nauseous just looking at it. This was definitely the right place. Getting inside the fortress was the hardest thing David had ever done. The walls weren't solid in any normal sense. Instead, they were made of twisted space-time that tried to confuse anyone who approached. David had to use every trick Zara had taught him about navigating folded space, plus his own human intuition, to find a way through. Once inside, David discovered something that changed everything he thought he knew about the Shadow Devourers. The fortress wasn't just a storage facility for stolen energy, it was a prison. At the very center, David found thousands of beings trapped in crystalline cages, all of them barely alive and connected to machines that were slowly draining their life force. But these weren't random prisoners. As David looked closer, He realized these were the Shadow Devourer's original forms long ago. They had been a peaceful civilization that had tried to transcend physical existence by uploading their minds into pure energy. But something had gone wrong during the process, trapping them between dimensions and driving them insane with hunger and loneliness. "We remember," one of the trapped beings whispered when it saw David. "We were like you once." David felt his heart break as he understood the truth. The Shadow Devourers weren't evil invaders. They were victims of their own failed experiment, trapped in eternal suffering and lashing out at the universe in their pain. Destroying them wouldn't solve anything. They needed to be healed, not destroyed. Quickly changing his plan, David began working on the quantum device instead of creating a prison. He reprogrammed it to reverse the process that had created the Shadow Devourers in the first place. It would require him to connect his human consciousness directly to their twisted energy matrix, using his unique bridge-building abilities to guide them back to their original forms. The process was incredibly dangerous. David knew that linking his mind to the Shadow Devourer's chaotic energy could destroy his sanity, or even kill him, but he also knew it was the only way to truly end their suffering and save the universe. As David activated the device, he felt Zara's presence grow stronger through their soul bond, even though she was fighting a massive space battle on the other side of the galaxy. She was somehow sending him strength and love across the impossible distance. "I'm with you," her voice whispered in his mind. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." The connection to the Shadow Devourers was like being struck by lightning made of pure emotion. David experienced thousands of years of pain, loneliness, and regret all at once. But he also felt the original hope and joy from before their transformation went wrong. Using his human ability to find patterns in chaos, David began to slowly untangle the twisted energy that had trapped them. One by one, the Shadow Devourers began to remember who they used to be. The dark storms of their corrupted forms started to dissolve, revealing beings of pure light underneath. As they were free from their torment, they used their restored power to help David free the others. But the process was taking a terrible toll on David's human body. The quantum energies were changing him at a cellular level, making it impossible for him to return to his original form. He was becoming something new, something that existed partially in normal space and partially in the energy realm where thoughts became reality. "David," Zara's voice called out as she arrived in her flagship just as the last Shadow Devourer was being healed. She had won the space battle and rushed to find him, but she was too late to prevent his transformation. "I'm okay," David said, though his voice now sounded like it was coming from far away. His body had become translucent, glowing with the same gentle light as the freed Shadow Devourers. "I'm different, but I'm still me." Zara landed her ship and ran to where David stood in the center of the fortress. When she touched him, her hand passed partly through his transformed body, but she could still feel his warmth and love. "The healing process changed me," David explained. "I can exist in multiple dimensions now, but I can't return to being fully human." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Zara said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You saved everyone. You found a way to heal ancient wounds instead of creating new ones. You're more amazing than I ever imagined." The freed Shadow Devourers, now calling themselves the Restored Ones, used their advanced technology to help stabilize David's new form. They couldn't make him fully human again, but they could ensure that his consciousness would remain intact. "Across all dimensions, you gave us back our lives," their leader told David. "In return, we give you immortality and the ability to travel anywhere in the universe instantly. You will be the eternal bridge between all forms of consciousness." Years later, David and Zara ruled together over a galaxy that was more peaceful than it had ever been. The Restored Ones had become allies and teachers, sharing their knowledge of dimensional travel with other civilizations. David, in his new form, could appear anywhere in the universe where his bridge-building abilities were needed. Their love story became legend across thousands of worlds. Poets wrote songs about the human who had stood frozen when the most magnificent queen in the galaxy declared him hers, only to become something greater than either human or alien. Children grew up hearing tales of how love and compassion could heal even the deepest wounds in the universe, and in quiet moments. When David and Zara stood together watching the stars from their crystal palace, they knew that their connection had created something beautiful that would last forever. David had found his purpose among the stars, and Zara had found her perfect companion. Together, they had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from power or technology, but from the courage to choose healing over destruction and love over fear.